Oh, okay.
Thank you. Hi, it's Thursday, March 24th, and I'm Gala Narezo. Um, and I graduated from the program that you're all in about 2 years ago, I think, right before the pandemic started. And so I'm just going to say, I'm always like, when there's a recording, I want to just like say what it is, and then we can just have a normal conversation. But the the thought behind this offering today was to talk about mindfulness and self-care for ourselves as a way to be centered, whole, healthy, to be able to show up for others. And that's kind of the basis of all my work and thinking, that it's like that idea of putting the mask on your kid first, right? Putting it on yourself before you put it on your child, right? So we have to take care of ourselves before we can be um, kind of ready to take care of others in some ways. And I'll just say a little bit about my background, which is that I'm an artist by training my whole life. I studied painting for many years in college. And then after that, I went into photography and I went back to school for photography. And then that kind of led me to very much community engagement work. That's where I landed. And art, it was like, how do we use art to connect and to think about societal impact? Like, how can art and social impact live together? But at the same time, I had a meditation practice that started in my early 20s. And so it was very hard to kind of ignore that piece of my life. So the three parts of my life that are very important are art, social change, and then mindfulness or meditation. And the meditation piece happened really because, like, for years as a young person, I kind of had these episodes where I was like out of myself somehow. I used to call it depression, dizziness, like I named it different things and pathologized myself in all sorts of ways for years. But what I knew was that I just couldn't, I didn't know what to do to like return when I'd have these dizzy episodes, and I just didn't know what was happening to me. And I thought, like, oh, if I eat the right thing, or maybe I'm anemic, or, just not understanding what was happening. And it wasn't until my early 20s when I started to take martial arts in Chinatown, Chinese internal arts. It's a form called Xingyi and Bagua and Qigong. And those forms are all very much based on breath work. Like, in order to do these martial arts, you do lots of breathing, and some of the instruction is to meditate every day. Like, you just sit in a corner and you count your breath. And it was I had an amazing teacher, but he was very humorous, and also, how would you say? I think sometimes they talk about people this way as having like crazy wisdom, but it was like, sit in that corner and count your breath till 100. And if you lose count, you start over, right? And if you try that, which we could try that today, most of us will probably get like to 3 on a good day. Like, it's like not very easy to get to very many numbers without losing count and kind of having the mind drift. But so he was my introduction to meditation, and that was 30 years ago. And he also helped me by offering me Chinese medicine, acupuncture, herbal teas that are medicinal. And the combination of doing all this movement and breath work and also the herbs, I think really within a year, I felt like a different person. I no longer felt that sense of like not being able to return to myself. Right. And I've practiced ever since in different ways. And so it's always been a part of my life and art practice also. And And now I became both I've been an art teacher. I've been teaching art for a long time in different capacities. But then I also became just a meditation teacher, which was never my plan. And and then I had a child, and I think having a child made it like even more important. So that's, I think some of the things I can offer in a way is like having needed the practices desperately as a child, and then having a child and thinking about like, what do kids need? And right now, within the world we're living in and everything that's happening, there's so much suffering. Like kids are really having a hard time, like all different kinds of hard time. And so are the teachers, right? And so are the administrators. Like we're in a moment where like everybody needs some kind of support and help. And so what I think is really powerful and magical about this work is that it helps you return to yourself. Like I was like at the beginning, before I give any talk, I'm like, what do I want to say? Like what do I really want to say today? Like it changes every day, right? Like what do you want to talk about? And I think what I've been thinking about is that we're living in a world that pulls us away from ourselves. In addition to like what my stuff was growing up was very much around my family being very dysfunctional. I think that was my stuff. But right now the world is pulling kids out of themselves. There's a million things that we all know, right? Social media, there's a war, they've just lived through a pandemic, there's all sorts of things to worry about. And so how can a person learn to trust themselves? I think that's the thing. I was like, what can we return to that feels solid? And as parents and teachers, there's this image that I have of like this horizon line. Like we can hold that for our students or for our children, like some sense of stability or maybe even safety, right? That's hard to know or hard to say, but how can we create it for ourselves? So it's kind of I think it's interesting to practice these things because you're practicing it yourself, and then you're able to model it and mirror it when you're teaching if you have these practices, and you can offer it to the students. And I believe that even though it's a little more popular than it used to be completely not like just ignored or overlooked the capacity of these practices. Now they're appreciated and brought into some schools. Like there's an attempt to bring it in, but for the most part, kids are not getting it. It would need to be, a lot more than is offered. It like, once a week, it's something, but it's just not, we need to practice and build up. It's like a weightlifting practice. Like if you don't exercise, you don't get stronger. And if you don't practice, then it's not going to really work. So there's a lot of different challenges. We can talk about that later. I know you were mentioning already, curiosity about how to use it. And it's very challenging to actually get some of this into the schools. But I see the kids respond, just their sheer exhaustion and stress. And when you offer a little bit of something, and there's a lot to offer, they really seem to soak it up like sponges. Like they really are needing a little tenderness and care. And so I think this kind of work can offer a part of like education around being a human being that we're not offering people in school. And so I feel really strongly about that. And I actually, when I was at City College, I was specifically there to get my master's so that I could create curriculum around mindfulness and art education. That was my interest. So in a moment, I want to ask you guys some questions, but I want to also offer an experience that you can have for yourself and take into your classrooms. And just say that I do a combination of meditation, embodied practices, pranayama, breath work, and then also reflective practices and using art and poetry and things to inspire kind of deeper connection to one's own ideas. So that's a little bit what I'll share. And so I was curious just what each of you, if you have any particular questions or areas of interest for me so that I could share or address them.
I was just appreciating like just the notion that not just about bringing mindfulness to students or to your children, but what you're saying about just having that resonance in yourself, because people respond to other people's energies, you know, and even in my own therapy and working as a parent, you know, if my child is reacting to something and I'm going to react to them, and then it's going to be like a cycle. So like having that kind of grounding, even if it's not obvious, like, you know, the practices that you're doing or sharing the practices, just having that so a little more solidity and peace within yourself, they can just feel that. You know, if they feel a grounded presence, whether it's your students or your own children, I feel like that's something really important to work toward, just because they're going to respond to you, you know. So it's not even necessarily about like sharing those practices, which is great, that's an extra bonus, but just being able to kind of be you know, a more stable presence in, which is really hard right now. Like you're saying, like they're struggling, but we're struggling. You know, I mean, I know for me as a parent, this has been like the most anxious time ever. I mean, just constant fear of like my children getting ill or dying at any minute. So it's like, you know, it's kind of more needed than ever to kind of find that place. I may have had it before, like I had other ways of getting there, but I feel like then when faced with all of these new challenges, it's kind of like there's more needed to get to that kind of state where you can be, you know, a safe presence for.
Right. Yeah, and I will underline, like with younger kids, it's actually, that's more the way you teach. You create spaces that are spacious and joyous, and you model the qualities of the practices more than teaching that with the younger children. So that's exactly right.
That kind of brings me to a question that I had about it's Gala, right? Is that how you say your name? Okay. I was wondering what the meditation, in your opinion, works best with, like which age groups are more responsive to it, whether it's the young ones, a middle school or high school. Like I'm kind of wondering how to go about that for young ones, middle school and high school. Like how do you address that? How do you make space for that? I'm just wondering how to do that in a classroom.
Is there an age group you're working with now, or you're with all the different ages?
Yeah, currently I'm not working with a certain age group, but I guess I'm just looking for like an overview of like how to incorporate that for each age group,
Right.
like successfully.
Sure. I'll say a few things. Like pausing is great for all age groups. Like a minute of silence before starting activities, or pausing in between is powerful for any age, and that works for the little ones too. And it's the idea of the pause is actually like really radical, because you know we're in a culture where nobody stops. And I asked a group of middle schoolers yesterday in our meditation to share like when they pause, and they were completely puzzled. It almost made me cry. Like it was just like the concept was so distant, right? So when do we pause, and can we just model that? Like if a bunch of kids, whatever age, come into a classroom from lunch or whatever and just barrel right into the next thing, they're not going to be ready. And the minute of quiet, they may still not be ready, but there's going to be like the pause actually does something to your nervous system. So does 10 deep breaths. It's actually scientifically noted, 10 deep breaths begin to calm the nervous system. And so you will be like, it's as if you were like hurling forward, and then you just kind of have to like, so those are really simple things. And I'll just say something briefly about age groups. With the littler kids, you might do fun things that kind of underline what we're looking at. So it could be one kid is going to pretend to meditate, and then the other one is going to come and bother them, right? And it's like, can we have a performance of what it's like to try to sit still really hard, and then somebody's bothering you, right? And so in a way, you're like acting out, like, how does the mind do this to us all the time? But instead of being like so didactic, we let them kind of have fun with it. Or you can have them meditate for 3 minutes and make a big deal of it, like, oh, we're going to sit still for 3 minutes, and it's almost impossible for the smaller kids, but you can kind of like make a game out of it, So there it's more fun and creative, and we're not going to talk about like the bigger ideas of meditation. Middle schoolers are just poor kids who are suffering. So I do relaxation with them a lot, like just lie down. And I was going to do that. I do it with everyone, but feel your breath. Yeah. So in a way, I'll do things, and then you'll recognize them. So this breath work is really good to do because it helps them just connect to something tangible. Instead of saying some instruction about the mind and the thoughts and this, you're like, just feel the breath in your body. And if you stop feeling it, try to return to feeling it. So that's where the embodied work is important. It's not conceptual, it's like you feel it. And then the older kids, you can really get into stuff. So it depends if you're public or private school, and what are your different, like the Buddhist Dharma is fascinating and full of like ethical, interesting questions. You can't really bring that into public schools, but you can bring in ideas of, it's like, the older kids want to know what to do with their racing mind. And so you can really just talk about it. You're like, your mind is racing. So we're going to practice noticing everything that's happening, understanding how the mind works, and then we'll return to the breath as a way to stop, attaching to our busy mind. So I guess it gets a little more didactic, and it can be like more intellectual and interesting as the kids get older.
I want to ask how you invite the pause. Like, what are the instructions you give, or like when you're just doing like the minute pause between activities?
Yeah. So it could be as simple as like, we're just going to be silent for 1 minute, which even that is a tall order in some schools, like, to make kids be quiet for 1 minute. Or you'd be like, put your hands, it depends which, what kids you have and are working with, like put your hand on your body and just feel your body breathe. Right. So that's another one. And, or the deep breaths, because deep breaths, you say, oh, this is going to help you relax. We know it. Science says so. Pranayama teaches us that a longer exhale is relaxing. So we can say, oh, these are all things that I was going to show, but in a way it makes it's a little more didactic that I can say it now, and then you'll try it. And you can say, oh, what does that feel like? Like we inhale 3 counts, but we exhale 5. And so that is also very, it's a relaxing breath. Yeah. Is it Anna? Anything from you?
Yeah, I was wondering about, I don't know the best way to ask this, but how can I explain it? Like the cultural, connotations, or how to, like avoid cultural appropriation with things like pranayama, which comes from India, and it's like very rooted in their religion and culture, and how to, embrace these practices, but with acknowledging where they come from without getting too deep into, you cannot get into, like, as you said, in public schools, like religion and that kind of thing. Yeah. I don't know if I made sense, but
It does, and it's a great question, but like everything I've learned, like you really have to, I'm often given 20 minutes to teach kids. So I'm just going to go in there and be like, we're doing breath work, right? Like I never say the word pranayama. I never say the word Buddhism. I don't talk
okay.
about Dharma.
I
None of that. I'm just kind of, I'm telling you because you're students and there's a history and a background to all of this.
Hmm.
And I think we each have to choose how we interact with some of these cultural appropriation issues. Like I'm Mexican American, but I read white, but I have a lot of Mexican culture in me just because that's where I'm from. And so, we all kind of have to walk that in our own way. But, in a public school, you will not be saying those things. I knew a Christian mom who was upset her kid was having yoga in a public school. So, I've just always avoided it because I don't want to waste the precious time I have to teach a kid something useful getting mixed up with all of this.
Yeah.
It's very political, right?
Makes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Gala.
Of course.
I wanted to ask if you use the word mindfulness when you're ever doing it. Is that also just better left aside?
Well, I'm going to admit someone right now. I personally, it's not my favorite word, right? It feels like one of the words that's been used, not say some of the words, I just say meditation. And now even more, I say breath work, embodied practices, but everything's moving really fast, right? How we talk about this. So it depends. Like I have a morning meditation group and I might say, we're doing shamatha now because that's the tradition I've learned. And it is, it's how you would call mindfulness if you're looking at the traditions that they come from. Yeah. And I'm really interested in all these conversations, but I think I want to just reach as many people as fast as possible who need it. And so to be maybe as these new words seem to be a little bit like the translations, breath work, right? Yeah. Does that feel like it's skirting anything, or is that answer? I mean, mindfulness also, like John Kabat-Zinn, who's the one who really helped, mindfulness come to the West. What MBSR is like, what he did was he's a Dharmic practitioner and he studied Buddhism for years, and then he created a program that works like as a medical intervention, not a medical, but an intervention that can be given to people who are not looking for any spiritual content, who don't want to hear words that might be distressing or that have anything to do with spirit, or like to get into those more tricky spaces, and they just deliver the practices. So that exists, but it's like that's almost, to your point, Anna, it's almost more problematic to me to take an amazing, centuries old practices and then like disembowel them and say here they are without any of their lineage. So that's tricky. Yeah.
And it also sounds difficult too, because you're trying to pack this into 20 minutes, and like a mindfulness practice, like you could spend over an hour yourself doing your own practice. So like trying to pack all of that, ideas that you just explained into the 20 minutes, like how do you do that?
Right. And so it's super tricky. And back to, I kind of read, I come with a lesson always for the kids, but I'm like, I read the room, and if like everyone's exhausted, I'm like, let's lie down. Right. And then I even said, it was just the sweetest thing. So I'm in this middle school and I had like, I don't know, 10 or 12 kids during their lunch, which was a big deal that they would come during their lunchtime. And I said, if you lie down and you're so tired that you fall asleep, it's okay. It's like you're tired. So just take a nap and don't worry about it, and the rest of you, I'll guide you. And that this one boy at the end, he fell asleep and he got up and he said, I took a nap. And then he came over and he gave me a hug. And I was like, how cool is that to be able to offer a kid, he's a middle schooler, but like he needed a nap, So that's
I think we all should have naps during the day. Like, I'm going to be so upset when my 3-year-old stops napping because I use it as an excuse all the time to like take a nap. I think we should have nap time, like as adults at work, personally.
Yeah, so like this is an interesting conversation because like lying down and resting or feeling your breath in your body, nobody owns that. That's actually not meditation. That's breath work, just feeling your breath. Because if we get to our practice, which I'd love to offer you guys, but we would do some breath work, like a sequence, because you kind of feel more in relationship to the breath. And then after that, we do the meditation because the meditation is working with the mind. So there's a difference. And I think another powerful thing, just thinking about like where kids are right now and the fact that they're like troubled in so many ways, is that there's a misconception about meditation that it's about not having thoughts or getting rid of thoughts, not thinking, and it's not possible. So there's like all these misconceptions. It's really good to say to kids, when we're meditating, we're gonna have thoughts, and that's what happens because that's how our minds work. That's how we're made. And so the point is that we're going to notice that we're having them, and we're going to learn, like each one of these, right, is a lesson. So noticing what arises, that's a lesson. And that's a lesson you can practice for your life, every day. So that's one practice, that they're noticing, and they get so caught up in stuff. And so then the next lesson is like, do you react or do you pause and respond, right? And so then that's another piece. We're working on noticing. We have an upsetting thought, but we're not going to act on it, right? We're going to take another breath, and then we can think about how we want to respond. So that gives you agency. And the other, I'm just giving you kind of like the kind of highlights of what mindfulness can offer to kids, but it's also critical thought, negative self-talk, right? That's like so huge with kids. And you're teaching them that all our thoughts are okay. We're going to listen to them and hear what they're saying. And then we can actually decide, I don't want to talk to myself that way. Like, oh gosh, listen to how I'm talking to myself. Like, would I talk to my friend like that? Or kids who are more depressed, you're at least letting them see what's happening. There's this moment of like, oh, that's what's going on in my head, right? Like, otherwise we might feel depressed because we're attacking ourselves, right? Where did we do that? But if you take a moment and you witness, like witnessing is a word also in these practices, we're witnessing our experience. You're like, oh, so then you have choice. Another lesson, right? We have choice. We don't have to reject ourselves or treat ourselves badly. We can take a rest when we're overwhelmed. And I just think we're up against like a system in the schools and a world that's pushing us away from health and well-being. It's like really like counterproductive, and it's almost like a cognitive dissonance because we're being told that we should think about taking care of ourselves. And we're even sometimes being offered mindfulness, and then nothing in the culture is changing so that we can actually take care of ourselves. So it's a very destructive cycle, and the kids are going to feel bad because they might rest but still feel exhausted, and then they'll feel bad themselves.
It's like if you're not doing a good enough job taking care of yourself, then you can feel failure for that too. It's like you're not, it's ridiculous. It's like a cycle.
It's so much pressure. I get to lead meditation. I introduced mindfulness and lead meditation at my law school for like like an access program that's pre-law. And so we bring them through like 10 months of meditation in each class. By the time they enter law school, we still offer it every week, and one person shows up. It maybe like you just to show that when, as much as we're like, yeah, wellness, well-being, self-care, self-compassion, all the things that we're trying to promote, we're also not giving them any time in the law school curriculum, in the law school ideal, right? Like how you're supposed to be operating as a law student, and no one shows up to my session. So
it's rough. Like, yeah, it's also just nobody really wants to do the hard work. It's just not easy work. And, you know, like someone like me, I'm like, you know, I was suffering and I did it and I'm no longer suffering. And so for me, it makes sense. And I think a lot of people, unfortunately, have to come to a place where they're like, I really need this. You know, that's why that's people who come to it usually are ready. But when we're looking at students who are suffering because of how a system that they can't change is working on them, that's a little different. And that's when I feel like we need to like weave this into the water of everything, you know, so that this could be a part of them taking care of themselves. Yeah. Yes. Yes. I haven't read the book, but there was an article on that, and it was, yeah. There is so much in the wellness industry that's completely, it's manipulating us in these horrible ways. Yeah, so that's really important. Thank you for bringing that up. Is it Syed? Hi.
Yes.
Just
Hi.
say hi because you came in, and just if you have any thoughts or things you're interested in, we're just kind of talking about this stuff, and then I was going to offer some practice.
Sure. I came in a little bit late, so I missed the early part. But I actually got this invitation from a friend who is a graduate of the theater education program at City College, and I also took a class in that. But I'm actually a science education person, and I have yet to start being a full-time teacher. And I'm sort of thinking about how I can better prepare myself to start, and have found that it seems like I'm interested in mindfulness because it just seems like one of the challenges I feel is organizing my thoughts and in planning, and I'm also interested in the science of it, and and how I can connect to the subject matter better that I'm teaching. And so, yeah, I'm just interested in mindfulness because of that. And I like the idea of somehow attending to looking for my own interest, not trying to rediscover my own interest in my subject matter that I'm teaching, because it seems like for some reason or the other, perhaps from going over it so many times, I've kind of lost a little bit of the spark around it. And so that's what I was thinking about. Maybe mindfulness might help in that regard.
That's nice. Okay, well, I'll say a couple things that I'm thinking. And so I heard that the idea of organization of thoughts and
Yes.
productivity a little bit, it sounded. And then also like freshness, coming to what you're doing with a freshness.
Yes.
Like, yeah. And I think that's the one that I think it's the most, you know, you could be the most useful for. It can work in all of those areas. But the one that I think, like also the idea of mindfulness for productivity is a little bit of a taking it outside of its original context, but it does work for that. Like it's a byproduct, right? But so the most exciting way you could use it in terms of this idea of being, you know, like being engaged in what you do is the concept of like every moment being a new and fresh moment, and that we live very much like in the past and in the future, and we're constantly like whining the past or thinking about the future, and we're always like creating ideas about what we're going to do or what we did, and then we're judging it, and it's like a never ending planning conversation in our minds. And when we do the practices of returning to the present moment, the body gets really happy. You feel differently when you do these practices, and all of a sudden everything that we're doing feels like more alive. And so I'm just telling you that because it's happened for me, and I know it happens for people who practice, but it's that there are these really nice benefits to practicing. And so that's one that you'll kind of come into your life with more interest and curiosity, because everything does feel a little more real, because you're living now instead of in the past or in the future. And then you can also take that practice once you have it and use it for organization and productivity. It's like great for artists for creativity, because you can like drop a question into your mind or a prompt, and you just start doing the practice, and like all sorts of info. It's like really, so one of the teachers that I love, her name is Arowana Hayashi, and she does a lot of embodied practices, and she was a dancer. And so she calls her embodied practices restorative justice for the body, because it's about giving the body an opportunity to kind of have its own voice, because our minds are given such priority over all our experience. And when you start to do these practices that are of the body actually, we've all heard this term body wisdom, and sometimes it sounds a little like, what does that mean? The body wisdom, right? We think the wisdom's in our mind, but the body tells us things. And so when we're doing more work with our bodies, like athletes and dancers and meditators can probably talk about this, but your body organizes differently, and then that allows you to have a different relationship also to your mind and how you're organizing and working. But you have to do the practices and see how it feels and kind of play with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've also been exploring some somatic awareness type things, which I think is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I think that's really interesting, because I feel like being a teacher is expanding, using more of using as much of yourself as possible, often including the physical aspect, and often it's almost like being a performer and using different parts of your voice. And there's so many different areas that I'm interested in exploring. So I feel like they all kind of have this theme of mindfulness and trying to expand or bring awareness as a tool.
I think so, yeah. And I mean, there's like, it's an overused term, but like there's this whole toolkit that you can like, make a toolkit of different practices and bring them into your classroom. And yes, somatic. So I'm very interested in different somatic practices, and that's really just being in touch with your body. And you can do everything somatically. So I'm doing somatic singing class and somatic body work, what it's cool, what you're saying is that our whole like life experience doubles in a way by inviting the body in, because we're so limited. We're just so limited, most of us, to our experience, like our how we relate with our minds.
Mm-hmm.
So once we allow the body to be part, a big part of this, there's a lot more to access.
Must be
So it's 8. I think we have like half an hour, do we? Or is it only 15 minutes more? I just would like to offer you a little bit of practice, I just think
let's do an activity.
And normally this is really interesting and nice for me to hear what you're all thinking, because most of my classes I'm just like guiding experiences the whole time, and so because you're all teachers, this is great to think that you're interested and that you would want to integrate any of this. And I'm happy to send resources and links to books or whatever you might be.
Yeah, I was going to say the author you mentioned, maybe before we go, if you could pop it in the chat or send it to me and I can share it with the community. You mentioned a name. I tried to write it down, but I probably spelled it wrong.
The dancer who
Yeah,
does
the dancer.
Arowana. Yeah, she's amazing. And I could send you a link to this one practice.
Yeah, just send any references you
Yeah.
think, and I can always share them to the
I'll do
whole
that.
community.
I made a little page that I was going to offer, and I was going to see what we went over. So I'll finish it afterwards and I'll send it to you.
Awesome.
Okay. And I did, like, when I left a little mindfulness packet in the office that was like as a resource, but I'm
Oh,
sure
sweet.
I'm outdated now. So, okay. Okay. So, and I had to go. Okay. So I'll do like a 15-minute practice, and then we could just come back and say goodbye if everyone's up for that. So I'm going to invite you to start on the floor if you are comfortable with that. And you can turn the camera off, or just, I don't have to see any of you. And, but then we'll come back to sitting in a moment. And the instruction is to lie on your back and let gravity do the work, just allowing yourself to feel your body against the floor. And for about a minute or so, I would like you to try to do nothing at all. So even thinking, what is it like to do nothing? This is a good question for students. And from our place of doing nothing, we're just going to shift into watching our breath. And watching the breath could be feeling, what is it like to be breathing? Do you breathe through your nose or through your mouth? Do you feel your breath high up in your chest? Do you feel it lower down in your lungs? You can notice if you're a shallow breather or a deep breather. In this moment, it changes. And then we will move to noticing our inhale and our exhale. Paying attention to the duration What is it like when you're just breathing naturally? How many beats is your inhale? And does your exhale match your inhale? Is it a little longer? So you're noticing and also feeling your breath, the inhaling and the exhaling. Now noticing how at the top of the breath, we pause for a moment before exhaling. And at the bottom of the breath, after the exhale, there's a pause. So spending a moment bringing your awareness more to the pauses in between than to the inhaling and the exhaling. Maybe even elongate that pause for a beat or two. Doesn't have to be uncomfortable, but you might just hover there for an extra second. That pause is sometimes called a gap in meditation. It's this moment when we're not really doing anything in between the breath. And I like that idea, even if it's just as a metaphor or an image. If we're talking to kids, back to this idea of responding and reacting, something happens and we can pause. Just like in between our breath, we can hover for a second and take stock. So letting go all of that breath work and just taking a moment to notice how you feel. This is also a great simple instruction for kids. We try something out, so that there's the action of the breath work, and then there's an impact. How does it make us feel? And so we can pause and actually notice that. This could be an antidote to how we are on social media, what it is to swipe, what it is to, go from one thing to the next. In this case, we're just taking a break to notice how we feel. How do we feel after going down the Instagram rabbit hole? So I invite you to sit up slowly, maybe rolling to your side, not yanking or jerking your body up, but being very gentle and sitting up in an upright position with a tall spine. Normally, I would take some more time to ask people about their position and talk about posture. That's important to do with kids as well. Make sure they're comfortable. So sitting up straight. This is a subtle difference, but as opposed to working with the breath and watching it and subtly manipulating it, right now the breath becomes the anchor of this practice. And we're sitting with something called open awareness. That's one way of thinking about it. We are sitting with a tall spine, breathing naturally. And kind of watching the movie of our life, like this witnessing awareness that we have in our mind, notices things that come up. And when we notice that we're off with a thought, we return to the breath. So the breath and the feeling of the breath moving through the body is the anchor we keep returning to. And this is when we remember and we remind our students that we're all going to think. We can't stop it. This practice is not to stop thinking. The practice is to notice the thinking, the feelings, the impulses to get up and eat something, the desire to move. We get to notice all these things that we do as if they were involuntary. So gentleness, kindness, important to remember that we lose our focus, and that's going to happen, and it's going to happen to our students. And even when they're giggling because it's hilarious to sit still, it's okay. We can encourage them to be exactly how they are and who they are, but we can also encourage them to be curious about what would it be like to return to your breath and try to return to this practice, even if just for one more minute. So normally we would stay here probably another 5 minutes, but I'm going to respect everybody's time. It is, and we'll come back together here for a couple moments. I like to ring the rin. There are different ways to do this. So we just notice how we're feeling. And if you're in a classroom, it's really fun to ask kids questions about their experience. They're so cool, you know, and when they're willing to share, it's great to hear. Doesn't always happen.
Thank you for guiding us through that, Gala. It was really relaxing.
That was great. Thank you. It's such a gift.
It felt quick, but even a little, like 15 minutes is like just that each day. And it, you know, just to start your day can really kind of shift how you begin. So, yeah. Any last thoughts or questions? Yeah, it's a great way to wind down.
I wanted to add that what I've found is that I can't lead students in it if I'm not practicing it myself. Like it shows through. That's my personal opinion, but it shows if I'm not doing my own personal practice and I'm trying to lead others.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I'm sure you can do it, but I think you're right that it was, yeah, it's just like what Carla was saying at the beginning, right? You wanna model it too. I mean, my plug would be for everyone to try to offer this everywhere you go and everywhere you are. And, you know, I'm trying to convince, you know, educators everywhere to teach teachers, because I think the teachers can then bring it into the classrooms, and that's probably the most direct way. But everyone can use it pretty much. Yeah. And to make it painless. Make it short and sweet, right? Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and I'd love, you know, any of the materials that you've collected. I'll be sure to share them out, and also your website and your information. Marit sent that to me, and it would be great. Like maybe, I don't know, we could talk about maybe doing something like this again, maybe with like an art activity as well, like how to incorporate mindfulness like with art, because a lot of us, you know, working with students artistically, so that could be something that would be, I think, interesting.
Yeah, I would love to. I had one planned. I mean, I just didn't know we were going to end up talking, but I think it was perfect. But I'd love to come back and do that.
Yeah, so that'll be our part 2 then.
Okay.
We'd love to have you back.
She wanted a part 2, so just let me know when.
Awesome.
Okay. Yes, you'll send out the information, but I mean, if anyone, I'll just put it here, my email. I'm very easy to reach out to, and if anyone wants any information, I have a class that is most mornings at 9 on Zoom. I take, you know, I'm on and off. I'm about to finish the cycle next week and then take a couple weeks off, but usually every morning I have an offering, and yeah, feel free to reach out.
You may see me there.
I would love to have teachers come. It's tricky to find time that works for teachers. I've really tried. It's really hard, and they're exhausted, and they're like, I want to, but I don't know when. So,
yeah, time is a big challenge,
yeah,
especially for teachers.
Yeah, and Emily, I really do hope you will reach out, because I would love, you know, I'm very invested and would love to know what you're researching and thinking about.
I will. Thank you so much. I absolutely will.
Okay. All right.
So thank you so much. Thanks to everyone for joining, and I'll definitely get information out to you guys, and hopefully we could do something like this again soon.
Thanks, Carla, and thanks, Gala. Have a good night.
Have a great night.
Thank you.
Bye.